How's it going, everybody? This is Cameron White with White Light Astrology, giving you guys your January 2019 horoscope for Cancer. Oh, Cancers, this is going to be a very intense month for you guys. I'm just going to say it now. Not all bad, but it is going to be intense. But you guys got this. You'll be fine. You know how to protect yourselves and nurture yourselves. Anyway, to get into it, this month kind of starts off with a bang. On January 1st, we have Mars going into Aries, and we also have the Sun, I'm losing my words, the Sun conjoining Saturn. And so with Mars going into Aries, it's been in your 9th house for a little while where you're doing some of that soul searching, doing something that, understanding and that learning that we were talking about last month. As Mars goes into Aries, it's going to enter your 10th house. So Mars is also in his home sign of Aries, where he can basically do the most damage. He can operate at the highest functioning level that Mars can operate on Mars's, terms and what Mars does. And this is kind of happening in your 10th house of your career, of your public vocation, how the people kind of see you. And Mars is all about, aggression and attacking and doing and actual energy. It also has to do with severing and cutting and problems coming up and anger and frustrations, but it's, about accomplishment at the end of the day. Mars is going to be in his home sign where he can really be expressive of those qualities at a very fine, at a very specific level. And while this is happening in your 10th house, I really think that Mars is going to manifest in a lot of different ways, where I think this is going to be either, your boss could be having some issues because the 10th house, represents that. But, the 10th house is of your career, of your public vocation, what you're doing. And Mars is in Aries, where you're going to be kind of charged up, wanting to focus more on doing that work, having those accomplishments. But you also might be finding problems within that, area of your life where you may be looking at, what do I really need to change in this? And we're going to be talking a lot about that because you have Mars squaring Saturn. We have a lot of Saturn stuff to talk about, which we're going to start talking about right now. Because also on January 1st, we have the Sun hitting Saturn, conjoining Saturn in your 7th house. This is a lot. Saturn's in your 7th house right now. Relationships are, it's a hard thing right now with you integrating yourself in relationships. You're learning how to discipline yourself. You're learning how to create a structure and a framework and make things efficient and actually have things materialize and what needs to be done and what, isn't necessarily an issue. And as the Sun hits Saturn, this is just basically kind of resetting the solar cycle with Saturn. And, he's out of shadow. He's flying forward in Capricorn. The Sun hitting Saturn is kind of just illuminating this area and going, okay, what is restricting around relationships? Where do you need to discipline yourself around relationships? What boundaries do you need within relationships? What really needs to be established in that sense? So that's going to be a big deal. And we have a lot to talk about with that. So we'll move on. But a couple of days later, on January 5th, we have this new moon solar eclipse happening in Capricorn in your 7th house. So a lot of 7th house stuff is happening this month. So it has a lot to do with your relationships. It has a lot to do with you, but it really has a lot to do with relationships. And as we have this new moon where the Sun hitting Saturn was kind of like realizing where the issues were, realizing what was, constricting and limiting, but also realizing where you need to apply boundaries, where you need to, not necessarily build up walls, but what walls also need to become, need to be torn down, what needs to be changed as far as the, not only the boundaries, but I'd also say the framework, just the actual structure, how the actual relationship works. As this new moon happens, this is kind of setting new energy and intention on that. And this is an eclipse where it is a big exclamation point. It is like, look at me, this is important. And, this is going to manifest later on in the summer when we have the other eclipses going on. However, when this new moon happens, I think this is just really going to be clearing that energy of like, okay, things need to be addressed. Things need to be, communicated of, because also Mercury goes into Capricorn on the same day into your 7th house. So I think this has a lot to do with communicating these things, communicating what needs to be brought up, what needs to be addressed as far as how things are kind of brought together in the relationship, like the actual document of it. It's kind of like if you look at it in a business sense, like a Capricorn thing is like the contract. That's even though that's like a Virgo thing of like writing the words and the details, but like the idea that's so Capricorn, like this is written on paper that you're good to go, I'm good to go, and that this is going to work, and that there's a system with it. And with this new moon happening, I think this is really realizing, okay, and addressing and communicating what that is. And so yeah, I really think that's going to be kind of interesting, but we still have more to talk about that. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself with that. So 2 days later, on January 7th, we do have Venus entering Sagittarius. So we did talk about Jupiter being in Sagittarius for the last monthly horoscope, I think I did, or the one before that. And Jupiter being in Sagittarius in his home sign and is in the 6th house, you know, this is really going to be kind of like a lot of energy. You got a lot of things on your plate. You're doing a lot, you know. It's the 6th house, your sense of service, employment, you know, what you're doing every day, your health. And as Jupiter goes through there, you know, your health may be doing a little bit better, maybe really busy, maybe overloaded with work and stuff like that. But as Venus comes in to join the party, I think this is when things are going to start to lighten up, and you're actually going to be really enjoying your habits and enjoying your routine and actually having a good time with what you're kind of doing every single day and actually living that and enjoying that and experiencing it. You know, doing something new with it, maybe something that you would like to enjoy more in your routine, and actually putting that in there, not being afraid to implement that into your routine. We'll be talking more about that because Venus will also hit Jupiter and trine Mars. But anyway, as we continue, also on January 7th, Uranus will go direct in your 10th house. So that might be, you know, like Uranus's explosions, big ups and downs. Like, you know, it's kind of unexpected. As Uranus is in your 10th house, that may be some unexpected things happening in your career. You know, this is Aries. This is kind of like accomplishment. This is kind of doing, but it's also maybe problems and arguing. So kind of expect the unexpected with that as well. But moving forward, on January 11th, we have Mercury conjoining Saturn and Capricorn in your 7th house. Where when the sun hit Saturn, where it was kind of like starting that whole new Saturn cycle, like new Saturn lessons, new Saturn things happening, Mercury conjoining Saturn is like speaking Mercury's delivering the Saturn message. What is constricting? What is limiting? What is, you know, like what needs to be addressed and what needs to be implemented? Where are the boundaries? Where are the walls? What needs to be torn down? What needs to be put up? And as Mercury hits Saturn, I think this is going to be a really big, like, serious, sobering moment. So I'm saying that now because expect that to happen, and it's going to deal a lot with communicating in relationships. What's going on with you in relationships? And you know, this isn't to say everyone who's a Cancer rising or a Cancer sun is going through relationship stuff, but the 7th house is your relationship to other people. It is or if you're married, it is like the person in your marriage. It has to deal with one-on-one relationships, but it has to deal with relationships to anything. What is your relationship to yourself? What is your relationship like to, you know, your parents? You're this, you're that. The 7th house also has to do with law and like legalities and stuff. So if you're like a Cancer rising and you're going through like a lawsuit, like looks rough. But at the end of the day, all this 7th house stuff has to do with relationships and working with you and another person. And so just wanted to clear the air on that. So Mercury hitting Saturn, I think, is just really about expressing and actually communicating that and addressing that. Moving forward, on January 16th, the sun is going to hit the south node, where I think this is going to be more of like, okay, you understand where you understand and you're very aware of where you don't want to be and where you need to start going. But I think the sun hitting Saturn is really going to open your eyes up to what have you experienced in the past and what have you integrated in relationships before that have worked, that have really helped you, you know, put some concrete and some foundation on relationships. And I think this is going to be the time of really realizing like what has worked in your past, what has done you good and justice, and what has like been efficient and effective in your past relationships that you can apply to this relationship that you're dealing with this situation that you're dealing with now. And so as the sun hits the south node, I really do think that's going to be a very awakening time to like integrate something that you've done before, a lesson that you've learned, and actually apply that. However, that's kind of like the first half of January. The second half of January gets pretty intense because then on January 18th, we have Venus trining Mars. So Mars is in your 10th house, you know, just a lot of shit going on in your career. You're just doing a lot. You're focused on a lot. But as Venus trines it where she's in your 6th house, I think this is actually starting to really enjoy your every single day stuff. Yeah, sure, your job's going to cause some issues in your overall career. However, I really think that you're going to be enjoying what you're actually doing with yourself, like where your time is being invested into and your actual sense of service. And you're going to feel this energy to like keep continuing doing that. So that's going to be a really special moment for you guys. It's going to be really exciting. But after that, on January 20th, the big January day of astrology, we have Mars squaring Saturn for one. But before that, we have the sun entering Aquarius, going into your 8th house. The moon going into Leo, having the full moon in Leo at 0 degrees, and it's also a total lunar eclipse. And Mars is squaring Saturn too. So as the sun goes into your 8th house, where the sun transiting your 8th house is always weird. It's just a weird time of change. It's a weird time of, you know, moving to different areas and going through kind of like a uncomfortable moving forward. Like getting out of your comfort zone sucks. It's kind of like waking up and having to get out of your bed every morning. It's like you just want to stay there and be cozy, but when you actually get up, like, you know you have to, but it's just like it sucks in the process. As the sun goes to the 8th house, that's going to be kind of like the big mood. But as the moon goes into Leo and it goes into your 2nd house, we have this full moon in Leo. It's the last Leo set of eclipses that we have. I think this is going to be really realizing a lot of your, not necessarily like your value, but what you really have. As the sun goes to the 8th house, where like the total, you know, theme of it is the 8th house is like transformation, you know, death, change, anxiety, taxes, inheritances, other people's resources. And as the sun goes right there where this kind of theme is being played out in a certain way, especially within the context of relationships, because it's also a Saturn-ruled signification, I think the moon in Leo going into your 2nd house is going to be kind of like, hey, what, like, for one, it's going to have to do with a little bit of money, of like, what's the money that you have? What are you really making from, you know, also what you've been doing with your career and your work, and how do you really want to implement that? How do you want to, you know, with these changes that you're going through, like you've got some more money now, things are looking better after you did those after you went through those eclipses. What does that mean moving forward, though? And I think that's just going to be a big time to look at, you know, their money situation. However, as Mars squares Saturn, and Mars is in your 10th house and Saturn's in your 7th house, you may find an issue with, like, someone that you really need to address that issue on. And it's going to be kind of causing a problem within, you know, it could be, this is super, like, funny because it could be something to do with, like, you know, a specific person in your company that you work with or whatever. You could just be having some problems that you really need to address with that. However, you could also really be having problems with the relationships that you have in your career. And it's also time to address, hey, what is the issue? What is the, you know, what is the problem? Again, where do you need boundaries? Where do you also need to restructure things? How can you make things just efficient and easier? But as Mars squares Saturn, it's going to be rough. It's going to be a little bit intense. So be prepared for that. However, this full moon in Leo is really just like, hey, dude, like, you're making money, like, things are good, like, you're enjoying your everyday stuff, you're actually you're on a good roll, like, who cares? After that, on January 21st, hold on, I need some water. On January 21st, we have Venus conjoining Jupiter in your 6th house. So that's kind of like, you know, that's so interesting. That's such an interesting place. Venus is like, you know, value and beauty and all these good things, and Jupiter is all about philosophy and your beliefs, and just he wants to give you presents. You have the 2 benefics, and they're in a dope ass sign, and they're in your 6th house. And the 6th house is just a weird area to receive that energy, because the 6th house is like your health and your habits and your routine and your employment. So it's like, hey man, you may be doing something, like you may just be stoked on your, you know, routine. You may be getting some type of advancement or an opportunity within your, you know, employment to do something unique or to learn something new or to just get rewarded for it, really. I think there's going to be a lot of rewards with that. But also on January 21st, Mercury conjoins the South Node, where when we were talking about the Sun on the South Node, where it's kind of like, what was the past experience you had with relationships, and how did you integrate that how can you integrate that lesson within your current relationships? And it kind of learning and looking back at that, Mercury hitting the South Node is kind of like understanding how to implement that and communicating that message, being able to get that message across and really realizing what has worked for you in the past in this case, and how can we really use that moving ahead and moving forward. And I think it's also going to have to do with being very vividly clear of what you no longer want and what you want to separate yourself from and what direction you want to start heading into. So wake up to that. But man, after that, the last couple days of January, we got January 23rd, Mercury goes into Aquarius, goes into your 8th house. This is kind of scary. This is kind of, you know, Mercury in the 8th house isn't necessarily having a good time. Mercury is going to be in Aquarius, where it's about integration and getting all the, you know, pieces together. And, you know, hold on, we'll talk about that in a second. Moving forward, after January 23rd, on the 25th, Mars will trine Jupiter, where again, Mars is now doing better in the 10th house, your career, your boss, your work. Like, things are just going to be going really well in that area, and you're probably going to be really enjoying yourself with taking advantage of the opportunities that are presented to you. But on January 29th, the last big thing that's happening, Mercury conjoins the Sun at 8 degrees Aquarius, which, when you have Mercury going cazimi, Mercury's piercing the Sun, this is happening in your 8th house, this is happening in Aquarius. I think this is really going to be kind of like, okay, you're going through this process of change. This could also do with, like, you know, your partner's resources, or you're maybe hear back from the tax guy, maybe hear, you know, something from something. You know, it's Mercury and the Sun in the 8th house. It's not necessarily going to be like the best of news, but it has a lot to do with other people's stuff. Anyway, long story short, as Mercury conjoins the Sun, I think this is going to just be on more of a spiritual level. Like, you're going to be able to integrate what you've been wanting to establish yourself on into this new way of kind of like doing things, and it's going to be challenging, but I think you're going to find the right like tweaks and turns to make in order to really be effective and be able to go through this change and go through this process in a way that's really going to establish these new boundaries that you've been setting intentions on, and this new framework around relationships and everything that they all, you know, kind of contain. So with that being said, that's your January. I hope you guys enjoy it. I think you guys are going to be really busy, but I think it's also going to be really fun. So with that being said, thank you guys so much for liking and sharing and commenting and subscribing, and I'll be seeing you guys next month.